Nick Freeman, Mr. Loophole, is going to be with me in a few moments' time with his dog George, and we're playing some of his favourite music and talking about an incredible career so far.
BBC Radio Nottingham.
In the summertime, the very first choice of my guest, Nick Freeman, who has chosen that. George rang it. Chose that one, did he?
George chose that one.
Okay, right.
It's his birthday today as well. He's 7 today.
Happy birthday, George the Staffie, who's now been very beaten by your feet.
He's got his own website called SaveTheStaffie.com, which I set up a few years ago.
Why?
Actually, but just to try and change the public perception of Staffies, because they have such a bad reputation.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most intuitive dogs that that actually exists. They did a test recently with an actress and a psychologist, and she met 100 breeds, and she didn't know any of the dogs she was going to meet, and she was an actress, and she cried, and the dog that interacted with more than anybody else, any other animal, was a Staffie.
Well, they're certainly interacting with him here, aren't they? They were loving him.
In my office, the dog comes to work. I've got colleagues who bring the dogs to work. It just creates a very nice, relaxed atmosphere. And it's actually one of the 2 dogs that the Kennel Club recommend out of all the hundreds and hundreds of breeds as being good with children.
Really?
That's all.
That's a surprise, isn't it?
2 breeds. Staff is one of them, and they won't recommend any other breeds. Which is so the website's designed to just tell the truth, really.
Okay.
So there we go. So George is here. He comes everywhere with me.
Lovely. Well, he's here certainly.
Except court. He's not allowed in court. I haven't quite managed to find the loophole that says that's okay.
I'm amazed.
But I'm working on it.
Amazed.
I'm working on it.
Since you're called Mr. Loophole, you think you'd find it. Now, do you mind if I do a dedication to 2 people to do with Father's Day, which I've missed? Could you please wish my husband Peter Taylor of Nuttall a happy Father's Day? He's a fantastic stepdad to my 3 children, Steph, Jess, Brad, and Grandad Riley. We all love him very much, from wife Amanda. And please would you wish Brian Paxton of Nuttall a happy Father's Day? He is an amazing dad, and we love him so much, and a super granddad and great granddad. Hope the sun comes out as we have a barbecue planned for, I can't promise this, from daughters Amanda and Debbie and son-in-law Pete, grandchildren Jess, Steph and Brad, and great-grandson Riley, and granddaughter to be Maddie. There we are.
Good luck with the sun.
Have your children sent you a card yet?
Well, one's in New York, one's in London. They phoned, and they've got. They said a very, very cool present arriving, and I've no idea what it is. They won't tell me, but it'll be here on Tuesday. Okay. So I'm intrigued.
So there we have you. You've got this reputation, Mr. Loophole, which the British tabloid press have dubbed you. I mean, you've worked with some remarkably famous people. But then at the beginning, you're just dealing with just law. But in the end, in Manchester, I know you did it first one in Nottingham.
Well, yes, I did my articles in Nottingham at Johnson Sharp Walker, 22 Weekday Cross, which wasn't a criminal firm that had a criminal department. And what happened was, I was very disillusioned with it. I was going to be a commercial lawyer, and one of the solicitors in this practice, without my permission, entered me for an advocacy competition. I had already secured a job with a large firm in London. And he entered me for this advocacy competition, and the first prize was £50, which was a massive amount of money in those days, and I was supporting myself. And I thought, well, he's entered me, I'm going to do it. I've never done any advocacy, never done any debating. I did it. I got through the preliminary rounds. I loved it, and I ended up actually winning it. And apart from the cheque, I completely changed career, and I thought, this is what really turns me on. And I got a job prosecuting for Greater Manchester Police. This was before the Crown Prosecution Service. This was back in 1981. So my second day on my feet, I was on my feet in court. There you go. It was drunks and prostitutes. Court 1, Manchester City Magistrates Court. That's why I went to Manchester.
Really?
That's how it happened. Mr. Loophole wasn't born on that particular day. He was born shortly afterwards.
Right, we'll ask you how that happened, because that's a very
Okay.
important turning point.
Okay.
Mungo Jerry,
Yeah.
you were very young when that came out, weren't you?
Well, that was the music that was played. I went off to Uppingham boarding school in 1970, in the summer of 1970, and it was a difficult time. I was very homesick. It took me, I think, 2 years before I could actually say goodbye to my mum without crying. But once I was there, I was okay.
Why did they do that to you then?
It's good for you.
Was it?
Mixed. But I've sent my kids there. And,
right.
But it's co-ed now. Had it not been co-ed, I wouldn't have dreamed of sending them. But they had largely good experiences.
Why? What happened with it not being co-ed then?
I think the dynamic's very different, and I think girls bring a completely different, friendly, a friendly atmosphere to the place, which I think is conducive to good education. I know single sex is supposed to perform better academically, but all I'm saying is, for me, I wouldn't have sent my kids there had it been single sex.
Right.
I did send my daughter initially to a single sex public school, Morton Hall, and she was there from, I think, 11 to 16, and ironically, she then went to Uppingham when she was 16 to my old house, which is now a sixth form girls' house. So, things change, and I just felt like that was the right thing. And interestingly enough, they would both send their children away if they could afford it.
Just before we move to our next piece of music, from our conversation, obviously you've made quite a lot of money.
I've not done badly. I've not done badly. That wasn't really what. Well, in a way, it started off when I was 7, and my dad asked me when I was coming back from Sunday school, "What do I want to do when I leave school?" And I don't know. And I said, "I don't know, Dad. What earns the most?" And he said, "Well, solicitors earn £4,000 a year," and that was a year, not an hour. This was back in 1963. So I said, "Right, I'll be a solicitor." And then I said, "What do solicitors do, Dad?" And he said, "Well, they argue for a living." And that was it. I thought, wow, arguing for a living, no clip round the ear, and getting paid, that'll do for me.
Leonard Cohen is next, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Suzanne. Well, I did my A-levels a year early, and so I had to have a year off. I couldn't go on. So I had a choice of either staying on for a term and doing Oxbridge. I wanted to get out of Uppingham. I was frustrated in many respects, so I wanted to get out. Had to have a year off, and I went off to Paris and I went to Israel, and so I did a few jobs. Sorry, I've let him go.
Hello, George.
Has he come to say hello?
Something just appeared between my legs.
Just keep your hand there.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
So I went. I did. I worked in, fun enough, in NatWest Bank in Carrington Street, Jess Fashion Centre. Then I went to Paris, working. I stayed in a place called Louvre, which was just outside, and I was staying in the first night, Hotel de la Gare, Station Hotel, 25 kilometres out of Paris. And the room shook. And I remember sitting there unpacking. It was a dingy, dingy hotel, no bathroom. I mean, really dingy. And I had a cassette player with me. And I put on Leonard Cohen, Suzanne, sobbed my socks off. And then said to myself, right, this is what you wanted, now get on with it. And I did, and I had a fantastic 5 months there. And I ended up, I worked for Wrangler. Then I worked in the kitchens for Air France for a few days. And then I got a job as a driver, as a chauffeur. I had a provisional license. I managed to tell them it was a full license, and I was driving between the 3 airports in Paris, transporting people and aeroplane equipment, and it was, fantastic. I love driving, and so that's what I did. But this song reminds me very much of my first night in Paris.
Oh, Suzanne from Leonard Cohen. That is such a haunting record.
Beautiful,
yeah.
Beautiful.
Nick Freeman is my guest, and we've established the fact you're in this legal profession. But you've got to get this nickname of
Mr. Loophole.
Mr. Loophole. How did it begin? What was the turning point?
Well, the turning. I was being followed by a couple of reporters all the time. Wherever I went, they turned up because they were aware that I was winning cases all the time, and they were fascinated. What was I doing? And I was basically it's loopholes of law. I was using the law, and I used to go into court with various legal arguments, and it would cause a case to collapse. And they were fascinated by it. And what started happening is they just started to write up the stories, and they'd refer to me as Mr. Loophole. And I have to say, I didn't like it. It suggests something sort of devious.
It does.
And
it's dodgy.
Underhand and dodgy.
Some of it looks a bit dodgy to me, actually.
What it is.
Up to.
And I'm very straightforward, and certainly not dodgy. So I didn't like it. I couldn't stop them. I've always learned you work with the press, not against them. Yeah. And I couldn't stop it. In any case, this was going on for some time, and I didn't realise the sort of the benefits of it. And then one day I remember reading in the Ashton local paper, it said the local Mr. Loophole won this case. And I read it, and I knew the guy, and I thought, he's just won his first case, and he's nicking my nickname. I'm not having this. And the penny dropped, and I immediately thought, right, I'm going to trademark it. And because I thought there's enormous value in this, that press want to coin a nickname. So I spoke to lawyers that afternoon, and it was quite an expensive, lengthy process. It cost a few grand, and it took about 9 months to do. But I did it, and commercially it was probably the best thing I ever did, because Nobody knows Nick Freeman, which is great. So I have my private life private, which is as it should be. But Mr. Loophole is my legal life, and I've adopted it and I've embraced it. And I sign off letters as a joke, Mr. Loophole, because people know Mr. Loophole. They don't know Nick Freeman. So it worked very well. So that's how it started. And fortunately enough, I had the foresight to realise I want to keep it for myself.
So 1999, was Sir Alex Ferguson a big turning point, getting someone, a very high-profile person?
Yeah, I just set up on my own in January 99. I'd been with a firm, I'd started with this firm, been there for 16 years, and I was doing minor celebs, lots of minor celebs, and then for years and years, I'd actually kept the names and addresses of my telephone numbers of clients because I wanted to go on my own. I just didn't like the office politics, and I just wanted to be a lawyer on my own. In any case, January 99, I left, and that first year, few months down the road, I get a call from Man United saying Sir Alex would like to see you, wow. I was summoned to his office, and I went to see him and took his instructions, and it was a fascinating case. It wasn't a case that I'd ever argued that defence before.
Well, it's interesting. Take us through that, because this is one I don't really have an issue with. I just find it an amazing story. How did you? He was what?
Well, he was caught driving on the hard shoulder. He had
Yes.
he had 9 points on his licence, so he was looking potentially at a 6-month ban, which would have been catastrophic. And he had been ill, and he'd been to see the doctor, and the doctor prescribed some stuff for him to sort his stomach out. He'd had a seriously upset stomach, and he thought he'd been cured. And then he's driving back from the training ground, and all of a sudden he's overcome with these terrible stomach cramps, and he had two choices basically, one of which is particularly unpalatable. The other was to get to the bathroom quickly, and he drove on the hard shoulder, and unfortunately was stopped by the police, who happened to be there. And not unnaturally didn't explain the problem because of embarrassment, and then he went on his way. And he had a choice, as everyone does. From a legal aspect, it's interesting because had he known about the problem before he'd embarked on the journey, he wouldn't have been able to avail himself of that defence. He had the problem and known about it, but I argued that he felt he'd been cured. And had he still had the problem, he wouldn't have risked half an hour in the car. So we were able to overcome that hurdle. And we argued the case, and funnily enough, I was at and we won the case. And I remember it was the day of the Selby rail crash, so I remember that. But funnily enough, I was doing a charity very recently, and a gentleman came up to me and said, "Mr. Freeman, will you sign my book, please?" Sorry, right.
Yes,
okay.
Off mic, you do sign your book.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry. He wanted me to sign the book, and he opened it at chapter 4, which was in sickness and in health. Then that was the name of the chapter. And I said, he said, "Do you want to know why I want you to sign it here?" And I said no, and I immediately thought, well, the poor guy's ill. I don't want to ask the question. In any case, much later on, I still hadn't signed it, and he came back and he said, "Aren't you going to ask me?" I said, "Okay, tell me." He said, "Well, I was the magistrate on Sir Alex Ferguson's case." And he said, "Every other magistrate that you've dealt with in your book, you've either had thrown off the bench or been castigated for, asking, 'Are you gay?' or winking at the press bench, or, there's been all sorts of stories where, unfortunately, it's been terminal from their prospective careers." He said, "I'm the only guy." And I said, "Why didn't you tell me that? I'd have mentioned you in the book." So I obviously signed it for him with thanks. So yes, that was my first, what I call really high-profile case.
Since there's been David Beckham.
That was very shortly afterwards.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about David Beckham in a moment, because we've got to get towards the news, and
Okay.
Pink Floyd are next.
Okay, yeah, Pink Floyd, well, Dark Side of the Moon. 1976, it was the heat wave. Haven't been too many, so I remember this one. And I've been on my gap year, been to Paris, and I'd saved up £520 and bought my first car, a red Triumph Herald convertible, 1360 convertible, OKY 54H. I loved the car. I polished it literally every day. As I was driving around the countryside that summer, I think I'd just finished my degree, or it was my last year, maybe the last year of my degree, and roof down, and it was just an incredible time in my life. It was just fantastic. And the great gig in the sky, well, the haunting sound of this lady singing was the most incredible. There's never been a sound like it. It's just fantastic. And I understand Dark Side of the Moon is probably the most influential LP there has ever been in all time. So just great music, and a reminder of very happy times.
Nick Freeman is with me in the studio, and let's deal with David Beckham.
Okay.
Right. I mean, see, this is where I start to feel uneasy. I mean, I've got to be careful what I legally here. There's a man driving his Ferrari at 76 miles an hour in a 50 mile an hour zone.
Yeah.
That's illegal.
On the face of it, it's illegal.
Yes.
But he had a defence, which was called duress of circumstance. So if, for example, you were driving at 76 miles an hour and a 50 mile an hour limit, and someone was pursuing with a gun, and you thought, I need to travel at that speed to escape, the law would allow you to do so. If someone was driving very closely and dangerously to you because for whatever reason they wanted to get a picture of you because you were so famous, and you felt that you were in fear, you thought, I'm going to have a serious crash, my life could be threatened, I could sustain serious injury, the law, it's not a regularly used law, but the law entitles you to try and escape. That makes sense. The law isn't stupid. It affords you a way out, and that was the point that we argued.
But did legally, I know I've got to be careful when I say this, but did that actually happen, or was that just a made-up case?
Well, I wasn't there. You weren't there. I act on instructions, and obviously we can only talk about what is in the public domain. But David Beckham made 3999 calls within the space of something like, if my memory serves me correctly, 90 seconds or less than that. Now, as I said to the judge, either he's got tremendous legal foresight and able to make those calls to try and lay down the foundations of a defence of duress of circumstances, which many lawyers haven't even heard of, or actually what he said was true. So, the lawyer is never there. The lawyer is never going to allow himself to be compromised. The lawyer acts on instructions but looks at the Crown case and then forms a view. I received David's instructions, and my own personal views are irrelevant, but what I am quite happy to say is that his 8-month ban was overturned and he received no penalty for the offence of speeding. But yes, he was travelling at 76 in a 50. Yeah,
and you shoot me down in flames, because I can't argue. If he made 999 calls...
Three.
Yeah.
I mean, well, exactly. I could say, case closed. It's a pretty compellable argument, isn't it? Yeah. But people are always cynical. And
yes, they are. They always think, on
the day. Well, everyone was entitled to a defence, but on the day of that trial, it was reported in the Sun on that very day that they tried to kidnap his child. Oh yes. So if you remember, this was back in '99, wasn't it? I don't think we can imagine what it's like to live a life in with that sort of degree of public exposure. Everything you do, wherever you go, whatever you say, you're scrutinised like that. So, in any case, that's what happened. The judge heard it with two magistrates, and they dealt with it accordingly. So
cleared that up beautifully.
Thank you.
Here's one I felt really sorry for, because if we can honestly say this hasn't almost happened to them. Van Morrison clocked at 36 miles an hour in a 30 mile an hour zone.
Yeah.
You got him off, didn't you?
Yes, I did. If you're going to ask me what defence I deployed, I can't honestly remember. But I do remember him being acquitted, and I'm not sure whether there was one or several offences.
One of the things I think there should be more leniency sometimes when you just break the speed limit by a few miles an hour.
Well, there is. Then it used to be that you wouldn't be prosecuted in the ACPO guidelines 10% plus 2. They now prosecute at 10% plus 2. So in other words, if it's a 30 mile an hour limit, the leeway, the latitude is 10% plus 1. So up to 34, you shouldn't be prosecuted. Right. At 35, you will. That's probably sufficient, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those speed limits are there for good reason.
Yes. But according to my research, you discovered prosecution papers had been served late and argued the delay was unfair, and the Crown Prosecution Service decided to drop the case. Well, fair enough.
It depends what paper it was, but if it was a notice of intended prosecution, for example, the statute actually says you cannot be convicted. It doesn't give the court a discretion. In other words, if you commit a speeding offence, the police have to serve a notice of intended prosecution, which means basically a document telling you're going to be prosecuted. That has to be served within such time that it should arrive within 14 days. And if it doesn't, the statute actually says you cannot be convicted. Now, I don't make the law, but obviously, if that is what the law is, I'm entitled to raise it on behalf of my clients. And I've done that for many high-profile clients.
John Denver.
Yes. Well, John Denver and his song. At this time, I was actually working in the Hot Brick Cafe in Nottingham. I don't know whether you remember that or not. I was actually showing people to their tables until I unfortunately got lamped in the face by a woman who I think she was going to make a run, and she tried to hit me. And then the next night, the manager said there was a big fight taking place, and the manager said, "Nick, can you come and sort this out?" I said, "Not on my wages, no." So there was a young lady called Annie who I was seeing at the time, and at this time I went for the first time in my life to the south of France. I went with 7 of us. We went in a van. And I remember the trip. For 2 weeks, we camped, cost £70, and this song was in the charts, and it played a lot down there. And it's just a beautiful sound, and it sort of it captivated my feelings for the south of France. And I don't like flying. I hate flying. I don't fly. In fact, since going to visit the south of France this time, I've been there forever since, and I actually am lucky enough to have a house there, and I try and spend as much time there as I possibly can. And I think John Denver and Annie's song, to some extent, is responsible for that.
Thanks very much indeed, Sarah. And you can go back to George now.
Yes, thank you.
Very therapeutic, your dog.
Lucky George.
BBC Radio Nottingham with me, John Holmes. Nick Freeman, Mr. Loophole is my guest. And actually, we ought to took the clock back a bit right at the beginning, because your father was in retail, wasn't he?
My father was in retail.
Where was that?
Jeanette's of King Street. Well, my grandparents started it. Yep,
really?
They had a factory. My grandfather, my grandma and grandpa started it, and they had a factory in Titchfield Street in Hucknall, and they had 2 small shops on King Street. It was a boutique selling ladies' fashion gear. I used to occasionally help on a Saturday. And so that was the business my dad ran, yeah.
You said with a smile on your face.
Yes, well, it earned me some extra pocket money, and it was good experience. And of course, my dad was a magistrate. He was a magistrate for 25 years, and in Nottingham. And he always used to say to me, "We wouldn't let your defences get by with us."
Did he? Really?
And fun enough. I remember once. I've done several drink driving cases in Nottingham, and I've been fortunate enough to win them all. And he's never been to watch me, but I remember on this particular occasion it was a drink driving case and assault and offensive weapon, and I suddenly became aware of my dad in court. I think you always want to try and impress, and I remember actually, I was at the top of my game then, but I remember being very nervous and sort of. I got hot and I started to shake a bit, and I just was aware of him behind me. Thank goodness I won the case. But it was the first time he came to watch me, and I suppose you're just trying to show your dad what you can do.
Isn't it interesting what makes you nervous?
It is, because I'm not the nervous type. I've been doing it a long, long time, and I couldn't help myself. I started to shake and sweat. Bizarre, isn't it?
What about your mum?
Well, my mum's she lives in Nottingham. My dad unfortunately passed away about 15 years ago now. And my mum lives in Nottingham. She's always very busy. She's 87, but thank goodness she's in great health. Real character, and she's going to give me a lovely lunch after this is over. So I'm looking forward to seeing her, and hopefully she'll be listening. So hi, Mum.
Hi, Mum. Oh, lovely. And very important in the Jewish family, isn't it? The mother.
No, she's the boss.
The boss. Yeah.
She's the boss, and she's not an argumentative one. My mum.
Brothers and sisters.
2 brothers. Yeah, both Nottingham based. Yeah. Both Nottingham based. Well, one lives in the Park and one's just moved out to Southall. So yeah, my family here. So, it's funny. I've lived in Manchester now since 1981, much longer than I've lived in Nottingham. But I come back to Nottingham, and you just remember everything, and it's where your roots are, isn't it? It's foundations. I was here for the first 21 years of my life, apart from going to boarding school. But this has always been home. And of course, I was a Red supporter. And sorry if that offends some people in Nottingham.
I hope it doesn't offend anyone.
But my father's best friend was a chap called Brian Appleby.
Oh, no, Brian.
Who was chairman of Nottingham Forest with Brian Clough during those halcyon years when they won back-to-back European Cup finals. So, I used to go with my dad on Saturday and watch the matches. But it was an incredible time to be brought up in Nottingham.
Yeah. Brian Appleby, another man who was larger than life in every
way.
Every way.
And he's still going strong. He's still going strong, yeah. Yeah, he's still going, but he has retired.
Yeah. We've got... it's Roberta Flack next. So I'm just looking at the order. Roberta Flack.
Yeah, Roberta Flack. Well, this really is... When I first went to Manchester, I went to work for the police in 1981. And I remember being invited to a party, and this music was playing. And you know, those early days in Manchester working for the police were incredible. The prosecutors were amazing, and my nickname, unfortunately, was Lionel Blair. And there was this incredible banter, and they would put over the tannoy system as a newly qualified prosecutor. You know, would Lionel Blair please go to court too, please? And this went on for 2 years. You know, just great humour, great camaraderie, and they were very happy times. But this was a song that was played as I arrived in Manchester at my first party in Manchester. It was a very memorable party, and it's just a lovely song.
Performance. Nick Freeman, thank you for that. So we
another beautiful song.
Yeah, beautifully sung.
Fantastic. Well, there were lots of artists who've done it. George Michael did a fantastic version, but I think that's my favourite.
Tell me, you're Mr. Loophole because you find loopholes.
Yeah.
Right. So, do the police and the Crown Prosecutor's Service quake when they see you coming into the court?
I think they make sure they try and get their act together, because they know that if they haven't got their act together, then it's going to be problematic for them. So, you know, by highlighting errors, I like to think that I'm doing a bit of a service to the public, because police officers have come and they've said to me many times, I make sure they do their job properly because their bosses don't care. And, you know, we have this lip service that's paid to road safety. And, you know, unfortunately, in my view, there's a lot of nonsense spoken. I mean, you know, for example, mobile phones, you know, we talk about banning handheld mobile phones, and now we get 6 points and a fine and a discretionary ban. The truth is, you know, if you're using your phone, whether it's handheld or hand-free, the chances of you having an accident increase fourfold. Is exactly the same level of distraction as drink driving. So what I would say is, you know, we're hearing all this Brexit talk. I would challenge any one of these would-be contenders to be Prime Minister to actually say, when I'm Prime Minister, I'm going to ban the use of any mobile phone in a car except for emergencies. Because if we're seriously concerned with road safety, that is something that needs to happen. They also need to get their head round vaping. More and more people are now vaping as opposed to smoking. It's a huge distraction, and of course it causes cloud in the car, it affects visibility, and there are going to be inevitably some very serious accidents, and it's totally ignored by legislation. And one other thing that's just so obvious is the drink drive limit. We've got the highest drink drive limit of any EU country at the moment. So what the government is saying is it's all right to drive with 80 milligrams of alcohol per 100 millilitres of blood in your system, and the chances of you having an accident increase fourfold. Now, how does that make sense? Most countries have a limit of 50, which is basically one drink. That's sensible, that affords you, you can have one drink, it's not going to impair your driving. Why do we tolerate such a high level? Where's the sense? Scotland's reduced it, most other EU countries have reduced it. Oh, Scotland's now 50. So why are we languishing? How does this sit comfortably with road safety? It doesn't. So, you know, we're hearing all this talk about Brexit and what these new ministers are going to do. In my view, these are three problems that they need to tackle to improve road safety. It's not complicated. It will be very straightforward. And they need to put the money where their mouth is and do it. If they're seriously concerned with not just getting in and winning votes, but actually doing something that is actually good for our roads. And that's what it should be about, shouldn't it? That should be why people enter politics, to actually do good rather than promote their own careers.
And yet you get someone like Steve McFadden, who he had 9 vodkas. Was it 9 double vodkas?
Yeah,
9 double vodkas.
I can't remember, but I do remember that different people have different constitutions, and he had a particularly strong constitution, and that was one of the reasons, and that the judge dealt with him fairly leniently. And, you know, I had an expert who tested him, and a report was submitted to the court, and that was accepted. So, you know, you might have someone who has 2 glasses of wine and they're on their back, and similarly you could have a crane driver who has 10 pints and he's absolutely fine. You know, I filmed a rugby player as part of my case to show that after the accident, he consumed a bottle of scotch in 7 minutes, and I got a police surgeon to video him doing it to illustrate that not only could he do it, but he did it easily and he was fine, to illustrate the point that actually when he says, I got home and I was shocked and I drank a bottle of scotch afterwards, that was feasible, and that's what happened. And in fact, he was acquitted because he was able to satisfy the court that that's probably what happened, and the Crown couldn't prove their case. So the point is, alcohol is a subjective thing. Look, the safest thing is just don't drink and drive. I don't drink. I would never have a drink and drive. Just don't, because it does cause some degree of impairment. But if you are going to, then just be acutely aware that it affects individuals. There's no cast iron law for how much each person can have. And it even varies between person and person in relation to what you've eaten, how you're feeling, how you've slept, etc., etc. So you're taking a chance. Don't bother.
Les Miserables next.
Les Miserables.
It's aptly named Miserable, and now I looked at the reason why.
Yeah. Well, I dreamed a dream. When this came out, it's still going strong. I was sort of in the middle of my career as a defence lawyer in Manchester, defending some very serious crime, bank robbers, rapes, murders. That's really what I was doing. But at the same time, I was also starting to look after these people, because inevitably these people would get done for drink driving or speeding, and if you knew your law in those days, you literally couldn't lose a case. And that's how this work started, by defending heavy criminals who would pay privately, as opposed to legal aid, for what they regarded as being relatively minor offences, and that's how it started. And these cases were fascinating. I remember on one particular occasion, the police trying to contact my house, and it was a Thursday night, I was playing squash. And to cut a long story short, the police were trying to contact me because one of my clients was holding a farmhouse and people inside it hostage in Derbyshire. And he would only come out if I was there. And this was about 1:30 in the morning. And the police were there. They came down my drive, pressed the gates, we let them in. And what happened was they threw me in the back of the car, and this was a very serious situation, and they raced off, and they got lost because they tried to take a shortcut from my house to Buxton police station. And literally after 2 miles, I had to stop to throw up because I'm a terrible traveller. I had to ask the officer if he'd be kind enough to sit in the back. I was literally sick the whole of the journey. I threw up again on Buxton police station steps as we arrived. We're then debriefed, thrown in one of those Land Rovers across the moors, then given a bulletproof vest. We then jog off, and then so that the police were able to say to my client, I was there. And fortunately, the point of the story is they all came out. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was injured. My client did, I think, get quite a long custodial stretch as a consequence of that.
Such a lovely song. George has just arrived in the studio. Thank you. What can I say? Except Nick Freeman, we've run out of time. I cannot believe it. I'd like you to come in again sometime. We'll have to organise something.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's gone bring George quickly.
With you.
It's gone too quickly, and George would love to come back.
And Paul Roby, you fall in love with George as well, haven't you?
He's wonderful. It's his 7th birthday as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Bless him. Dogs are so special, aren't they? There's no doubt about it. Wish we still had some. Anyway, what can we tell you? I'm